Welcome everyone to my talk today on how blockchain and sustainability can coexist. My name is Nikhil Vadgama and I'm from the Centre for Blockchain Technologies at University College London. In today's talk, I'm going to be talking a little bit about sustainability, the environment in particular, and how blockchain can be used as a technology to facilitate sustainability outcomes, and how indeed blockchain can be a sustainable technology itself, given that we've seen a lot in the press recently about energy consumption related to blockchain technologies. So let's start by looking at sustainability. So, what is sustainability? Well, sustainability in a business context refers to doing business without negatively impacting the environment, society, and community. And in particular, in the financial services world and with respect to corporations, the term ESG is used referring to environment, society, and governance. Within the environment pillar, there are issues such as the climate crisis, pollution, waste, and conservation that are looked at. Within the society pillar, there are issues around values, ethics, inclusion, equality, and diversity. And within the governance pillar of ESG, there are issues around transparency and indeed structures and processes for stakeholders. ESG is very important in the context of corporations, and indeed is front and center of many organizations when they think about sustainability. And indeed, there are many views of sustainability, including the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This talk will focus on sustainability concerned with environmental impact and particularly blockchain. So let's put a little bit of context around environmental sustainability and blockchain in the upcoming slides. So firstly, within the context of environmental sustainability, carbon and emissions tracking is one of the most important aspects and vital for tackling climate change. And we can look at a quote by Mark Carney, UN Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance, where he says, if multinational companies focus on their emissions all the way across their value chains, reductions can be pulled through economies and across the world. And indeed, with respect to this and emissions reductions, and indeed looking at emissions throughout an entire value chain, we have seen worldwide agreement on what needs to be done. And this is through, for instance, the Paris Climate Accords, where parts such as net zero greenhouse emissions before the year 2100, continuous improvement of targets to reduce emissions faster, globally recognized principles of pricing carbon, clear accounting and reporting rules for commitments and tracking, and leveraging private sector finance to build adaptive capacity are all aspects that have been agreed and seen as important with respect to carbon reduction, carbon tracking, and so on. And indeed, the market has responded in line to this. And so we see that within the market, many headlines have appeared showing the growth within the carbon tracking market. And so, for instance, global carbon market grows 20% to 272 billion in 2020 from Refinitiv. China's carbon market to grow to 25 billion by 2030, according to Citigroup. Global carbon offsets markets could be worth 200 billion by 2050, Berenberg. The market is indeed responding to the importance that is being placed on the tackling of climate change and indeed through tracking carbon and reducing carbon emissions itself. Carbon industry has become more important, but there are issues that are in place when it comes to tackling carbon and emissions throughout the entire supply chain. And the issues around this, in particular with being sustainable, are, for instance, a disjointed and lack of granularity for emissions accounting systems, the complexity of permission-based roles and ecosystem requirements, and double spend and matchmaking inefficiencies of carbon assets. And these kind of problems are nicely echoed by the quote on this slide from Marley Gray, principal architect at Microsoft and IWA chairman. The IWA, or Interwork Alliance, is an organization that helps to promote blockchain technology, in particular token usage in industry. And Marley Gray states that there are not enough verified. Verified is the key word. Carbon offset credits in the world today just to satisfy Microsoft's needs for this year. This was an eye-opener. Every major corporate is coming out with these big sustainability goals, so we have to do something dramatic to improve the supply of verified offsets. So within this context of understanding a little bit about sustainability and indeed with respect to environmental sustainability, where does blockchain come in with respect to carbon tracking, carbon emissions reduction, and indeed generally around blockchain use case in sustainability itself? Well, blockchain or distributed ledger technology, as the wider umbrella term for the technology is known, operates with several different principles. And these principles or features of the technology are firstly this concept of decentralization, a movement away from centralized control to indeed distributed control amongst many stakeholders. The principle feature of immutability, that you cannot change what has been uploaded and written into the ledger once it is there. Principles of cryptography, such that there are strong measures of security, tamper-proof detection, and indeed identity verification on participants interacting with the ledger, and finally features and principles of smart contracts, and where relevant, particularly on tokens and tokenization. As a technology, distributed ledger DLT enables a more efficient means of fostering trust and verification. Blockchains in an environmental context can improve verification and trust in tracking emissions, carbon, and indeed in facilitating new business models. Recently, blockchain has also come under scrutiny with respect to its environmental footprint. So let's see how blockchain can be an environmental sustainable technology before we go and see actually how blockchain can be used to facilitate sustainable outcomes. So, what do we know about blockchain as a sustainable technology itself? Well, there are firstly many different estimates of the energy usage of blockchain technology. In particular, the part that is referred to about their energy usage is the consensus mechanism, the bit that actually leads to agreement amongst all participants who are using a blockchain or DLT about what the information on that particular ledger will be. And there have been many headlines and many research pieces that have come out, particularly about Bitcoin. And Bitcoin uses a proof of work consensus mechanism. And this proof of work consensus mechanism is quite energy intensive because it uses a number of calculations in order to lead to consensus or to mine transactions into the blockchain itself. And there are indeed many different estimates on the energy usage, in particular that the Bitcoin blockchain uses more energy than a whole country in some particular period of time and so forth. Now, this, of course, should be caveated by looking at what is the energy usage of that particular technology versus, the use of the internet or indeed the financial services system and so on and so forth. But certainly we can agree that the proof of work consensus mechanism with blockchain, with Bitcoin in particular, is quite energy intensive. But newer blockchain technologies are coming through, and they're using newer versions of consensus mechanisms that are far more efficient than older kind of the 1.0 or even 2.0 versions of blockchains that have emerged previously. And at University College London, recently we published a report that highlighted some of the research we were doing into blockchain consensus mechanisms and indeed their energy efficiency. And we can see on the right-hand side of this slide, there is basically this chart is showing the calculations we perform to understand what is the watt hour per transaction, or effectively the energy efficiencies of different particular blockchains. So as you can see, Bitcoin with its proof of work has the most energy intensive consensus mechanism that is seen. Kind of Ethereum, which is another older technology, is also quite energy intensive. But we see newer technologies, for example, like Polkadot, Tezos, Algorand, so forth, with reductions and being more in their energy usage, and indeed being more energy efficient. And indeed, we see the most energy efficient is Hedera. And Hedera is even more energy efficient than the Visa network itself, according to our calculations. So indeed, new blockchain technologies are far more sustainable as a technology. And so we should not be worried about blockchain as a sustainable technology. It is certainly becoming and has become a much more sustainable technology, and will continue to be even more sustainable in the future. So now that we know and we can see that blockchain is a sustainable technology, how can it be used to facilitate environmental sustainability outcomes? Well, blockchain and DLT can be used in multiple ways to improve sustainable outcomes for the environment, including in carbon tracking in supply chains, improved supply chain management itself, carbon credit trading, tracking of carbon credit generation from underlying projects, where indeed it can be also used with other technologies such as Internet of Things, and peer-to-peer energy trading. Now, what is interesting about all these particular use cases is it leverages the core features of blockchain and DLT, which are around tracking, trust, and verification. And indeed, all of these particular use cases, and the use cases that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, using these particular properties of blockchain itself. So let's have a look at the last part of this talk at three particular use cases that are utilizing blockchain to improve environmental sustainability outcomes. So the first one is related to asset tokenization and renewable energy credits. So the problem is that access to markets where you can trade renewable energy credits, carbon offsets, and environmental commodities in a transparent and decentralized way is not mature. And today's clean energy investment markets are also fragmented, inefficient, expensive, and limited. In this particular problem, DLT or blockchain can facilitate automated end-to-end tracking and exchange for projects producing carbon offsets or renewable energy credits. So here in particular related to tracking of particular energy credits, the exchange of these particular energy credits as well, blockchain with its properties around decentralization, around immutability, around use of cryptography and smart contracts is a perfect example of a technology that can facilitate a solution to this particular problem. And an example here is RegDeFi, which you can go and have a look at more in depth, that is built on the Hedera blockchain, Hedera DLT. Another use case, asset tokenization, particularly for carbon storage. So here, land and soil in particular can be used for purposes of storing carbon through planting and other methods. But the markets for offering this land and soil for the purposes of this are immature, inefficient, illiquid, and indeed without verification. And importantly here, the most important part is the verification of what this land is being used for, and say the carbon levels within the land itself. Again, DLT with its properties around verification and trust and decentralization can again help to facilitate a tokenized land and carbon offset marketplace, which also incorporates verification of projects in a transparent way. And an example here of this particular use case is Dovu. And Dovu here is creating a marketplace whereby soil and land can be traded for its use in carbon. And in some cases, indeed, the value of the carbon storage in the land can actually be more than the price of the land itself. So it's important to have transparent markets where one can trade the value of the land itself which is more than just the worth, it's what's underground as well. And finally, the last use case that I'm going to be talking about is peer-to-peer energy trading. So here, peer-to-peer energy trading can lead to more efficient allocation and exchange of energy between those supplying and those demanding it, particularly as more solar panel and battery usage becomes prevalent amongst smaller suppliers and even for households themselves. And this more energy efficient trading can lead to more efficient management of energy. And so the problem here has always been that smaller players find it difficult to access the grid and to transfer their energy in amounts that are meaningful, in particular where there are small amounts of energy transferred, where there is indeed small amounts of payments that are put in, and indeed issues around verification that indeed that energy has been transferred and so on. So blockchain technology here can actually facilitate a system whereby micropayments facilitated. So what this means is that very small payments can function because these payments are not currently economically feasible when we talk about conventional infrastructure that is in place. But with blockchain technology itself, micropayments could be facilitated for this type of energy trading, and indeed better verification of energy transfer and a greater degree of trust in the exchange of energy done in real time, for instance, could be possible. And an example of a project where this is actually going on is power transition. So, thank you very much for listening to my talk. My name is Nikhil Vadgama, and if you'd like to get in touch, please do. Thank you.